Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the From Death to Dynasty podcast. I'm super excited to sit down with a really interesting guest today, Mark. Going to hear all about his experiences in the recruitment world, get a load of insights from him, and hear what he's currently got going on right now. So, Mark, I will pass it across to yourself for a quick introduction.
Thank you. So I'm president and CEO of Tyler Lake Consulting. Started this business about 2.5 years ago, having worked at several small and large recruitment firms across the US, some global, some local. Um, Tyler Lake, both my kids. So there's some deep meaning there and excited to be talking to you.
Exactly. Super excited to sit down, Mark. I mean, you've had a wealth of experience, small firm, big firm, now taking the step into founder a couple of years back. Just to kick us off, could you maybe share, a little bit about your journey into recruitment and what it was that drew you to the industry?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. I think that I certainly did not grow up imagining that I would be a recruiter. It wasn't even my first job, I'd say, as an adult. I worked in kind of mental health, and I knew I enjoyed working with people. And there's a lot of therapy, I guess, I have to do through my day-to-day job. But I'll tell you, what kind of drew me into the industry was I'm actually a cancer survivor. So I had Hodgkin's lymphoma. The long name is nodular lymphocyte predominant Hodgkin's lymphoma when I was kind of in my early 20s. And at the time, I was going through treatment. There was a drug that I couldn't afford. And I was sponsored through a patient advocacy program by a company named Amgen. They sponsored me for the drug, and I had this like deep kind of connection, right? Everybody always talks about the bad side of the pharmaceutical industry. And for me, I had a really positive kind of experience. I married an American girl. I moved from Canada to the US. And, that was my time to kind of reinvent myself and do something different. I had no idea what that was going to be. I actually met a guy on the golf course who had just sold their boutique executive search firm focused purely on life sciences. And I was fortunate enough that he gave me the opportunity. He basically said, "Hey, come to my office on Monday. Let's chat." And, the rest was history. He gave me a terrible pitch. It was kind of like, "I'm going to pay you very little money. You're going to work really hard. And if you last a year, you'll be okay." Um, I kind of took it as, hey, this is a good stepping stone to kind of dip my toes into a different industry, do something that I have a connection with. And if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Again, I was already passionate about the industry. So it seemed like a natural next step. And so I was able to kind of help many people through the work, just, gaining knowledge about the industry and the different drugs out there. And people would approach me and say, "Hey, my friend's going through this, or my daughter, or my son, or whatever is going through this. Do you happen to know anything?" And it was really rewarding. So I continued to connect on a different level to kind of the industry. Um, and then spent a few years there before being sought out by kind of Corn Ferry and some of the work that I've done and clients that I was working with that were in parallel with them. And my career kind of took off from there, working in a couple different businesses and kind of learning uh, the nuances of those businesses, what they did well, what I felt like they didn't do well, and kind of grew from there. So that was kind of my point of entry.
Wow, super inspiring story, and yeah, nice to hear that you do have a bit of a personal affinity to the industry as well. I can only imagine that comes out when you're dealing with clients with true passion. We actually share a similar journey, to be honest with you. I also started like my first adult job was in a psychiatric hospital as well, so worked there for 5 years throughout university. It taught me, same as you probably, a lot of skills that are transferable to the work that we're doing now with people. So no, super interesting, and yeah, you can't sleep in the golf course, my friend. There's always there's always people to meet and opportunities there. So no, super
Absolutely.
interesting, super interesting. But yeah, great to hear all of that and sort of how you've landed where you are today, doing super, super well. Could you maybe, with Tyler Lake, could you maybe walk me through, the early days of the firm? What was the original vision there, and how has that evolved over time?
Yeah, I think that, I've always been kind of against the grain of traditional recruitment, meaning, I have deep core personal values that I kind of grew up with. And I found that sometimes the industry didn't really align with that, right? Um, we all need to make money. We have mortgages and houses and kids and whatever else we need to kind of take care of financially, but money's never been my primary driver. And I felt like I was constantly faced with people where it was, right? Money was their primary driver. That was paramount about in terms of everything they did. And so for me, it was always kind of secondary. What I wanted to do was to make a difference, was to connect with people, was to do a good job. And that was value enough for me. The money just came from kind of doing that. And that's the foundation in which I was able to kind of build my business. So over the years of working in different businesses and having exposure to different leadership styles and different company cultures, I always kind of felt like I I was kind of like in this corner of my own to some extent. And where I was able to navigate those businesses successfully, there was always a part of me that was like, this could be done better, right? It could be done more effectively. And so after kind of working in a few different businesses like that, getting the exposure at the Corn Ferry, working at ZRG, working in a boutique shop, I decided in, I want to say 2023, that I wanted to take the leap. I had considered it even kind of beforehand, and I had the foresight of doing that just in my own contract negotiations and kind of things like that. But 2023, I kind of decided, hey, I'm going to take this leap and I'm going to do it. And I kind of, we sat at this round table, my wife and I said, hey, this is what I want to do. And she looked at me and she said, you're out of your mind. And I said, no, I agree with you, but if I don't do it now, I feel like I'm never going to do it. And I'm just going to get stuck in kind of this hamster wheel. And so, I took the leap of faith and, I think I've been better for it. I'm really proud of kind of what we've built to date and the culture that we've created within the business. And candidly, the work that we're doing with our clients, right? It just it resonates and it makes me feel better about the work that I do and going into work every day, right? I genuinely enjoy it.
100%. And I think you touched upon a really important point there. It's like when money's the byproduct of just doing an amazing job, you sort of remove that transactional side to recruitment. It's more so, how can I help this person to the best of my ability? Then if I'm able to do that, we're then compensated fairly. So I think it's a super, super good point you touched upon there. And also, it takes a lot of courage to move from, stable employment benefits, the rest of it, to make that jump. So yeah, I mean, you've clearly made the right decision. But yeah, just on that, so obviously sitting down with your wife, you've had the conversation. She says you're crazy, naturally. Um, in those early days of the firm, what were the biggest challenges that you faced, when it came to growing the business or even just making the transition from, you know, full-time stable employment to, the sea of abyss that can be a founder?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that kind of come to mind. I think people often take for granted kind of the infrastructure that exists when you step into an existing business, right? The policies, the procedures, the marketing collateral, right? All of those things didn't exist. Now I had seen it before, but that also comes into the next point of like, in terms of resources, I didn't have the bankroll of these huge companies. I didn't take on any investors. This was totally self funded. And so I needed to be really thoughtful. There was a ton of sweat equity that went into this kind of early on, of doing some, all-nighters type of, building the byproduct or building these products in terms of, you know, laying out who are all the clients that I've worked with, what type of firm do we want to be, what is our culture, what is our mission statement, who are we, right? So creating all of that and creating that identity, and then thinking about early on, again, some of these bigger firms, they have resources to invest in technology, right? So what is the key technology that I needed to bring in? How do I optimize this process? What do I need? What can kind of fall by the wayside early on, and I can kind of figure it out until I'm kind of there. And so I think those were challenges kind of early on, and kind of facing those and kind of slow and steady building it out. And then I think the other piece is kind of brand recognition, kind of more holistically, right? Obviously, I had a lot of relationships in the industry, but I by no means knew everyone, right? And there were a lot of companies that didn't know me. And so approaching them and saying, hey, here's our business, here's who we are, here's what we do. That's like, it's great, but I've never heard of you before. Yeah, we're new. Okay, and then you have
Yep.
to go through that entire process. So I think those challenges and kind of building a brand and building our presence in the marketplace to be able to be known was challenging in itself, but then take that a step further and incorporating all of the more strategic initiatives from like a business perspective, I think were challenging as well.
100%. And I think it's a big misconception of like people leave that full-time employment to, buy back their time and get escape the 9 to 5. But what they find is instead of working 9 to 5, you're working 9 to 9, 7 days a week, and
Yeah.
it just never stops. But on the brand recognition piece, because I know it can be super hard. At the beginning, how did you go around that? Was it a case of, crazy outbound? Was it networking events? What was your specific strategy to, build that up?
It was a combination of everything. So I think just in general, I'm a big believer in there's no silver bullet, right? You can't just do one thing and expect that that's what's going to work, right? It's got to be a combination of things to get to the outcome that you want. So for me, I literally went through my LinkedIn and went through my Rolodex, and I called every single person I knew, right? I emailed them, I LinkedIn messaged them, I called everyone and I said, hey, here's what I'm doing, here's what we're up to, this is why, this is what it looks like. And there were a lot of questions, and it created really good dialogue. I then leveraged that to say, is there anybody else that you can introduce me to? I started going back to, searches I had done in the past and people that perhaps I hadn't connected with in a while, reach back out to them. Hey, just wanted to check in. Started going to networking events, looking at local events, looking at big conferences that I can attend, looking at marketing opportunities. I certainly, something that I hadn't done previously was try to create a bigger presence on LinkedIn, and posting relevant content that I think would resonate to start building that name recognition as well, not just for myself, but brand identity for the company as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I was not shy to ask for help. I was not shy to try to do things that were out of my comfort zone. And I think that's what it required early on to kind of build that up.
100%. I think we've all sort of been through it where you start something, you're trying to pull every single lever that you can, message every man and their dog to try and get a foot in the door. So yeah, I think that's super relatable. Looking into growth now, Mark. So you are clearly building and have built something incredible. And I'm always interested and sort of fascinated by how successful leaders do think about the future. So say looking ahead over, the next 12 to 24 months, what are the biggest growth priorities for yourself and Tyler Lake?
Yeah. So It's tough because when you're a business owner, there's just so many things that come to mind that you can do, and you can't accomplish them all at once. And if you try, probably won't do them well, right? You'll do them, but at 50% or 40%. And so for me, I'm pretty thorough just in my approach to things, and I want to do things at the highest possible level. Thinking about the next 12 to 24 months, I'd say continuing to add deeper specialization in additional markets where we can serve our clients. Um, as an example, one of the things we've launched kind of over the last couple months that we've noticed is some of our clients were seeking contractors, right? More short-term projects, 6 months, 12 months, 3 months, whatever it might be, and not necessarily bringing somebody on a full-time basis. And so that was a gap for us. It's actually not something that I had ever done before. Certainly, I'd worked at businesses where they had done it, and there were people who specialized in that. So we had brought somebody on who specialized in that and actually launched the interim arm of our business. And that's an area of growth that we're going to see continue to grow over the next 12 to 24 months that we're really focused on building. And again, it's all about how do we provide a full service to our clients, right? What is your need? How do we match that need and not try to fit, a square peg into a round hole, so to speak? But I think it's also always important to kind of continue to maintain and even strengthen our long-term client partnerships, making them less transactional, more transformational, right? Really continuing to make an impact for them and grow those accounts that are the foundation of our business, right? They were here with me early on. And so that's an area that I'm always thinking about. How do we do better, right? How do we build new relationships? How do we create different inroads at our existing clients? And so that's something that we'll continue to look to do over the next 12 to 24 months. And then I think, the other thing that this goes past even 12 to 24 months, but surely as a focus for us is kind of data generation, right? Leveraging long-term data over time to continuously better inform our clients on real-time market analytics, right? It's not something that can be built overnight. It's not something that's built in months. It's built years and years, and seeing how things progress. And a lot of the times what we try to do is not just conduct a search that's transactional and delivering candidates, but also delivering data and analytics that they can find valuable, not just for this search process, but for future search processes, but also within their business. And how do they adapt? Who are our competitors? What are they paying? What type of levers are they pulling in different areas like equity and bonus? And are we comparable? Are we going to try to be comparable? Or are we not going to try to be comparable? How do we kind of meet the market where they're at? And so that type of data generation is certainly something that we want to continue to leverage and continue to collect to be able to provide to our clients over time.
100%, and definitely invaluable data to have. But yeah, I sympathize with you in the case that unfortunately it's not something that you can click a button or just have happen, in a couple of days. It is a very long process to do that. But once you have that and once you have the bank, you're pretty much off to the races. So with the new contractor sort of sphere of your business that you have opened up, in terms of that, what's been the biggest challenges to getting that off the ground, or is it still in the pretty elementary stages?
Yeah, I'd say it's still pretty much in the elementary stages, but I think it's also providing to our clients who've historically looked at us as an executive search firm doing professional search and executive search to say, hey, we have this new service offering. We're able to provide you with this. Is this something that you're interested in, right? Spreading the word. And I think, also collecting, and we've done a really good job of this so far, but also continuing to collect a candidate pool that is interested in that level of work, right? It's a totally different candidate pool altogether. And while we built our database incredibly successfully over the past 2.5 years, this is almost like a secondary database that we need to build. So I think those are the challenges. And then learning we've learned the nuances, at least for me, learning the nuances of that business and what it looks like and the different structures and how you bill it. And, some clients, they want to pay directly the contractor. Some clients, they want us to pay the contractor. So, making sure that the infrastructure is there to meet our clients where their need is.
100%. Super interesting. I know whenever you're opening up new verticals, there's many challenges. So yeah, interesting to hear how that went down. I guess, if there's if there's one thing, Mark, that if you could put your finger on it, that if you could fix it or improve it, it would have the biggest impact on your firm's growth. Do you have an idea of what that may be?
Such an interesting and challenging question.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say it's a question that I ask myself relatively often is how do we grow the business while preserving the integrity of our process and the values in which the business was built on, right? Because again, when I built this business, it was the values that I believe in, not necessarily what collectively the recruitment industry believes in, right? And so that's how I wanted to do it. I think the area that I typically come back to is technology, right? Technology is just such a fast growing space in general, and it's leveraged now in our everyday life in a way that we haven't had to, if you go back 20 years ago. Was it there? Sure. Certainly not to the same extent that it is today. But developing proprietary technology that better streamlines the process for us and the client, I think is really important. Now, this doesn't mean losing the high touch that we pride ourselves on providing for our clients, but more automated data analytics, a platform that is kind of built for purpose to some extent with the right intentions in mind. Um, I can't say it's not something that we're already working on, but it's certainly something that takes time. I want our clients to be able to see kind of in real time, what are we doing, right? What's the output? What are the numbers? I think I joke about it all the time, especially in kind of retained search, but it's one of the few businesses where you pay a stranger money to do a job that they haven't yet done and then
Yeah.
expect that they're doing it without any look behind the curtain, right? And so I think to some extent, I want to find a way to alleviate some of that where we have nothing to hide. At the end of the day, we want to provide a good service. Everybody knows the challenges of recruitment, especially internal talent acquisition. If they didn't, we'd be out of a job, right? So why not create a platform that would allow them to see behind the curtain, allow them in real time to analyze your output and ensure they're doing what they say they're going to do. And so, that's something that I'd love to course correct, not just for our business, but as an industry as well, that I think could bring a lot of value.
100%. And transparency only breeds greater trust with yourself and the client, which only leads to, higher lifetime value as well. So, yeah, definitely an interesting take. And as you say, nothing to hide, proud of the work. You want to show the work that you're doing. Um, so, yeah, definitely super interesting. And I guess on that, maybe around what you just spoke about there, are there any strategies or ideas that you have tried in the last year that you found to be interesting, even if they didn't work out, the way that you'd maybe hoped?
Yeah. This is a practice that I still try to put in play. So on every search, we provide analytics. We provide who we're reaching out to. We provide who we've talked to, who said yes, who said no, who's on the fence. Again, we want that transparency to be there. Um, but no, I think it's something that we want to incorporate more on a formal approach and a platform that they can really log into and see. Um, but yeah, I mean, we certainly do a little bit of it now, but it can be better.
Yeah, I understand, and it's just navigating how can we do that and how can we do it in a better way. Um, so yeah, totally love that. And I know that you more so operate on a retained model as opposed to contingent. Can you maybe tell me some of the thought process behind more so prioritizing retained than contingent and why that decision was made?
It's a tough question that many of my clients won't want to hear. But I think, when it comes to retained versus contingent, typically a contingency contract is working with multiple firms at the same time. And not that I'm opposed to the competition. I actually built my career on that competition. When I started my career, I was purely a contingency recruiter. And my value prop was I'm better, I'm faster, I'm more efficient, right? The challenge with it is it's not as clean, right? It's a race to the finish, and sometimes pieces get missed in terms of the amount of time that you're investing into that candidate because you want to get that candidate in front of the client as quickly as possible. The other piece of it is I know the quality of my work. I know the amount of work that I put in to understand who my client is, what they do, what they're like, what the culture is, and my ability to deliver that message in an effective way. What I find sometimes with contingency work is it's messy, right? And you have a bunch of different recruiters delivering a very disjointed message, and it's very confusing for the candidate. And so oftentimes what I find is I'm doing a lot of cleanup work, right? They're missing out on opportunities and great candidates because they haven't delivered the right message. They don't know what makes them tick. They don't know enough about the client to really be able to focus in on what is interesting about this role. Equally, what are the challenges that they're going to need to face, right? And so when you have that on a contingency front, it makes it difficult. Does that mean I'm going to put less attention to a contingency search? I mean, the reality is somebody who's retained me and my time and my focus is going to get a level of attention than somebody who's only half in, half out, right? It's almost like you get what you pay for to some extent. Um, but a retained search allows me to just go a little bit deeper. Typically, it gives me access to the executive team. It's a true partnership and understanding not just the immediate need, but also long-term strategy and how this kind of fills into that. And I can poke holes and I can ask questions and I can provide guidance and structure that oftentimes I'm not given the luxury to do through a contingency search. And so I think that's the fundamental difference, right? And I think also the industry and the candidates see the investment that the company is making in delivering the right talent, right? So if I'm just blowing it out there and saying, hey, just go find me anybody here at 10 different firms, what does that mean in terms of how much they actually value that role versus somebody who's gone out and paid somebody to exclusively work on this and find them the best possible candidate and spend the time talking to them? There's a subliminal message there that most people miss, and they don't realize that that's actually what they're putting out into the industry and what candidates sometimes are seeing. I'm not going to make a blanket statement that that's all the time or that contingency doesn't work, because there are a lot of companies that have been very successful with that model, but there's a give and take that comes with that.
100%, 100%. I really couldn't agree more. I think there's big differences from, one or the other. As you say, you can be successful with both. You really can. But when we do look at that talent pool, we have sort of 70% of which are your more passive talent. And I just feel sometimes with a contingent search, it can be harder to tap into, that majority pool of people, um, where a lot of your good talent does lie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really think I mean, personally, I'm a big believer in retained over contingent. I am just in terms of, quality and then also client relationship. As you said, you remove that transactional element, you partner up, you act as an extension of their team, and you can really come in and help them that way. But no,
And and I'd say like there is a hybrid in terms of a happy medium, right? And so what we've seen, especially for new clients, is sometimes they say, "Hey, we don't want to make this crazy large investment, right? So maybe we do, a small fraction of a fee up front, but it's exclusive." And for some clients, I've had the experience where I've said, "Listen, here's what I'll do. You know, we'll do this exclusively contingent, but I do it once so that you could get the experience because I don't want to hold back on what we're able to deliver because I have to make sure that my team is spending their time efficiently as well. So give it to us exclusively. Let us work on it. Let us execute so that you can get comfortable with our work product. I can appreciate that that's a tough thing to dish out all that money when you actually haven't seen the work product. And for us, limited brand recognition and connection to that, I can respect it. So we're happy to work with them and find a creative solution that does get them comfortable while allowing us to actually do our best work, if that makes sense.
perfect sense. I think it's the birth of the retingent model. Whereas
Yeah.
like if you know what I mean, if you can get contingent on an exclusive basis, whereas like and I think you touched upon it perfectly. It's like let me come in, let me show you what we're made of, and then once we've worked together, you'll sort of understand the reasoning behind this. Um, so yeah, I think it's a great take, and especially as you say, when maybe you don't have huge brand recognition just yet, it's an amazing way to get that foot in the door and really, show your worth
Certainly.
100%. But yeah, Mark, just sort of coming to a little bit of a wrap up here. Throughout your journey, whether it's as a leader or now a founder, what do you think, if you could place your finger on it, has really been the most rewarding part of all of that for you?
Yeah. So it's funny. I've told this story a couple times, and so I'll kind of bring it all to head. But really, what it comes down to is the success of my team and the people around me, right? I think I say that cautiously. And the reason I say that is because I've heard it all too many times in my experience throughout my career where I've had a leader who said to me, "Your success is my success. And I want you to be more successful than I want to be successful." But when it comes to their success over my success, their success really does come first, right?
Yeah.
When push comes to shove. I've always been a believer in this. And, I've told this story before where I remember at my first firm, I was about 2.5 years in, and I'd worked exclusively in this space in medical affairs, specifically on medical science liaisons. I knew everybody in this space. If you were in this space, I knew you. It's what I built my career on. It was the first search I did coming into the industry, and I still do them to this day from time to time just because I love the space. Little more junior, neither here nor there. We had this junior person come in. They just started. They were about 2 months in, and they were struggling. They were not getting the success that they hoped for and they wanted. And this is not a business that's for the weak. Okay.
Yeah.
If you have to put in your dues, and you're going to see a lot more failure than you are going to see success. And this person was feeling it, and they got a medical science liaison role. That was from one of the founders of the business. And I took them aside and I said, "Hey, here are 10 people. Call these 10 people. Let them know that I gave you their names. If you can convince 5 of them to interview, you will make a placement. They're all primed. You will make the placement. Even if you get 3, you'll probably still make the placement." Sure enough, He went out, called those people, got 5 to interview. About a month later, made the placement. And so we always used to do like, where did the placement come from? How did we find them? And so this person, sure enough, went back to the founder and said, yeah, Mark gave me this list of 10 people. Okay, great. About a day later, get called into the boss's office and he says, well, I don't understand. Why didn't you call those 10 people? Were you just being lazy? Like you didn't want to do the work? And I said, listen, I could have called those 10 people. All 10 would have answered my call. I would have made the placement. But the reality is, his need to make the placement at this stage in his career is so much more important than me making a few extra dollars. Because at the end of the day, look how motivated he is now to make his next one. He's working that much harder because he's tasted success. He knows what success looks like. He knows the path. He knows the process. And we've put him on it. So at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's about him and making sure that we can get them on the right track. And so that's really what I believe in, right? I want to see everybody around me being successful, right? Money, as I've said before, is not my primary driver. Do I need to make a living? Sure. But I'm okay with my team even making more money than I do if that means their success. I stand to be successful off the back of their success anyways. So, being part of their journey, lifting them up when they're down, and inspiring them is always an amazing feeling. But more than that, celebrating their wins, their successes, they all work really, really hard. And seeing it come together and then the ability to kind of be recognized for that work, I think is incredibly rewarding on my point. I think it's very easy to kind of glaze over the small wins that we see day to day, whether it's a send out, whether it's a great pitch, whether it's a contract, whatever it might be. Those are the small wins that are working towards the big wins. But that to me is the most rewarding part of kind of being a leader and building this team.
Love it. I love it. It's all about trying to, drive company culture. And this is how people stay happy to work for you. And this is how you keep loyal workers who, would die for the company, die for you. And it's something so honestly, it seems minor, but something as small as celebrating those little wins where someone's been having a rough day and then they get that one thing and it picks them up. And then if everyone else joins in and everyone's super happy, it just goes such a long way. I couldn't agree more. So, yeah, I think amazing point there, Mark. And just finally, if you could go back, whether it be to when you started as a recruiter or the start of Tyler Lake as a founder, if you could give yourself that one piece of advice, obviously no silver bullet, but if there was that one piece of advice, what do you think it would be?
Yeah. It's another great question because it's so hard to answer. I'd say, one thing I really believe in is to stay true to yourself and trust your gut, right? We're very discerning in our business. We always got to ask questions and dig a little bit deeper. But I've always believed, in honesty and integrity. It's always been kind of like a core value for me as a person. And I find that sometimes in search, those values can be lost, right? We can be desensitized and directed differently by certain leaders. This is something I've always been against the grain of. And now being in a place where I don't have to answer to anybody and I get to create the culture and the vision that I want, it's never spoke truer to me, right? That I've always known deep inside, like, be kind. These are all people that that they're just people that deserve respect and want to be treated the same way that you do. And so treat them with integrity. Be honest, even if sometimes you don't want to be because it's a bad message to have to send. One of the things that I hate the most is having to tell somebody that they didn't get the job. You know how many times I get thanked by somebody when I tell them they didn't get the job? And they said, I've worked with 3 other recruiters that never called me back, just ghosted me, right? So, yeah, I'd say stay true to yourself, trust your gut, work with integrity. You know, if you kind of stick to that path, I think the rest will kind of sort itself out.
100%. 100%. No, Mark, thank you so, so much for coming on today, sharing your story, sharing your experience. And I think you've left with some pretty hard hitting and closing remarks that I hope other people take in and really start to employ in their business and how they operate as well. So no, really, thank you so much for this, Mark. Where can people find you? Where can people find the business?
Yeah, you could find us on LinkedIn. Easy to find us. You could look at our website, www.tylerlakeconsulting.com. And I know that telemarketers can find my phone number on my LinkedIn profile. So feel free to call me, shoot me an email. I'm always happy to answer, always happy to talk. But thank you so much for having me on here and really enjoyed the conversation, Owen.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you.
All right.